Welcome to our page. Here is a topic under ecology. A topic that is very interesting. And this question we are seeing here came in 2021 under internal candidates. Biology paper 2, 2021 internal candidates. Now, ecology is the study of interactions of living organisms with each other and their living environment. How these organisms interact with each other and also with their non-living environment. The non-living environment, this is where now we find the land, we have the air, where in the atmosphere we have the air that these animals breathe. We have the water that is found in either rivers or lakes and the other water bodies that we can talk of. Okay, so we have these terms under ecology. A, explain the meaning of the following terms. Habitat. A habitat is a place where organisms live. Okay, a place where organisms live. So we are going to write here on part A. Let me use a different pen so that you are able to see clearly. A habitat is a place where organisms live. A habitat is a place where organisms live. Now, there is need to give an example because if you look at this question, each term is 2 marks. So an example will add value to your answer. So a habitat is a place where organisms live. Now, how should be the nature of this place where these organisms live? So we are going to say e.g. aquatic or terrestrial habitat. Aquatic or terrestrial habitat. What do I mean by aquatic or terrestrial habitat? An aquatic habitat is an environment where there is water, e.g. in a pond, a river, or a lake. Terrestrial is on land. So we find these organisms on a terrestrial habitat, which is on land, and in aquatic environment, which is water. Okay, so a habitat is a place where organisms live, e.g. aquatic or terrestrial habitat. Okay, we go to the next term, a community. A community is a broader term which means a group of populations living with each other and their non-living environments in the ecosystem. So it is a group of populations, meaning that there are different populations here. So we are going to put S to show that there are different populations. It is a group of populations that interact with each other, and their non-living environment. Okay, and their non-living environment. Okay, so we have these communities. Now, in this community, we have a group of population, meaning that we have different types of population. We have the population, we can give examples here. We have population of birds, we have population of lizards, we have population of cows, etc. So these are different populations. Okay. Now, mind you that a population consists of only one type of species. If we say a population of birds, meaning that we are not including these other populations. It's only birds. If we say lizards, it's only lizards. Now, a community is a group of these populations that interact with each other and their non-living environment, e.g. birds, lizards, and the cows. Okay. Then we go to the next part, a niche. A niche is a role played by an organism in the ecosystem. A niche is a role played by an organism in the ecosystem. In the ecosystem. E.g., now in the ecosystem we have the manufacturers of food, and these manufacturers of food are the green plants, which are found in the first trophic level, which we call the producers. Okay, so in this case we are going to talk about green plants. Green plants, e.g. green plants, are producers. That is the role they play in the ecosystem. They are producers, manufacturers of food for other organisms. We have now animals. Animals are consumers. Animals. Okay, we have animals are consumers. So that is the role they play in the ecosystem. To consume the food that is manufactured by the green plants, which are the producers. And bacterias. Bacterias are decomposers. We have the fungi and the bacterias. These animals are decomposers. They feed on dead organic materials. So that is the role they play in the ecosystem. So a niche is a role played by an organism in the ecosystem. E.g., green plants are producers or manufacturers of food needed by the consumers. So we have the animals. The animals, generally, they are consumers, meaning that they feed on what? On green plants, depending on the trophic level where they are. We have the primary consumer and the secondary consumer. The secondary consumer will feed on animals now that feed on the plants. Okay. Then we have the bacteria that are decomposers. So that is the role they play in the ecosystem. Okay. Now we have this question here. We can see, using the named examples, explain what the food chain is. So they want us to explain what a food chain is. A food chain is a feeding relationship of organisms in the ecosystem. So I'm going to write somewhere. Okay? So as you are explaining, what the food chain is, we have to say that a food chain is a feeding relationship. Is a feeding relationship of organisms in the ecosystem. In the ecosystem. E.g., we are going to give example. So we have, okay, a food chain is a feeding relationship of organisms in the ecosystem. E.g., we have cabbage. cabbage can be eaten or fed by rabbit. Then a rabbit can be fed by a human being. Okay? A human being. Then a human being can be fed or eaten by a lion. Okay, so this is an example of a food chain. So the arrow should point at the organism that feeds the other organism. So in this case, the arrow is pointing to a rabbit, which feeds on cabbage. And this arrow is pointing to a human being that feeds on a rabbit. And this arrow is pointing to a lion that can feed on human beings. So this is an example of a food chain. Okay. Now, we have this question here. This was B part 1. Now we have part 2. Okay. Part 2 of the question, I'm going to explain briefly on how you should answer this question. Mind you, you are explaining. Here is the question. Explain how energy flow through the food chain. So the energy flow in the food chain. How does the energy flow? Now, this question here, to explain how the energy flows in the ecosystem, you have to write it in a paragraph form. Okay? Now, it starts from the sun. So I'm going to write something here. I'll write the sun. From the sun, I'll write green plants. Okay? So what comes from the sun is that the principal source of energy in the food chain is the sun. So what form of energy do we find in the sun? We find light energy. We find light energy. This light energy from the sun is captured by the green plants during photosynthesis and converted into chemical energy. Okay? Chemical energy. And stored by the plants in form of starch. Okay? So we have light energy from the sun, which is captured by the green plants during the process of photosynthesis, and this light energy is converted into the chemical energy. And this chemical energy, which is in form of starch, it is consumed by the primary consumers. So down here we have the primary consumers. Primary consumers. So the primary consumers, they will feed now on the chemical energy, which is in form of starch, which is under the producers. Okay? So since we know that green plants are producers, so the primary consumers will feed on green plants and obtain the chemical energy, which is stored in form of starch. And this chemical energy, it will be stored by the primary consumers in form of carbohydrates. Okay? In form of carbohydrates. That is in the plants. Okay? Meaning that the animal that feeds the other acquires or obtains that energy into their bodies. So the energy is transferred in the body of an organism that feeds the other. So in this case, the energy in plants, which is the chemical energy, is transferred in the body of the primary consumers. So in this case, under the primary consumer, we can have a rabbit. a rabbit which will feed on the green plant, which can be cabbage. So the chemical energy from the cabbage is transferred in the body of the rabbit and is stored in form of carbohydrates. And these primary consumers, they will be fed by the secondary consumers. So we are going to write secondary consumers. So meaning that the energy in form of carbohydrates will be transferred in the body of the secondary consumer. In this case, we can be human beings. After we eat a rabbit, the energy found in the body of the rabbit, it will be transferred in our bodies as human beings. Okay? And finally, we can have the last one, which is the tertiary consumers. Okay? Tertiary, the tertiary consumers. Okay? Now, the energy will be transferred in the body of the tertiary consumers as they feed on the secondary consumer. Meaning that a lion now, in this case, if we're dealing with a lion under the tertiary consumer that can eat a human being, the energy found there in the secondary consumers, which is in the human being, will be transferred in the body of the lion. But at the end of this trophic level, we find that only 10% of the energy will be transferred to the tertiary consumer. Not all the energy, the 90%, the other 90, because percentage is out of 100. So if we look at energy in terms of percentage, we have to know that 90% of the energy is lost to the environment through metabolic processes of these animals. You find that a rabbit will undergo metabolic processes, a human being will also undergo metabolic processes such as digestion. Okay? So digestion there is energy is lost through those processes called digestion. We have also excretion. These are energy that uses the energy. And only 10% will be the amount of energy that will reach the final trophic level. So that is how energy is transferred in the ecosystem. So as you explain, please write your answer in paragraph form. This has been written for the sake of illustration. Okay? So as you are explaining, you should be a smart student. You say that light energy from the sun is captured by the green plants. Light energy from the sun is captured by the green plants during the process of photosynthesis and converted into chemical energy, which is stored in form of starch. This chemical energy stored in form of starch is transferred to the primary consumers, which will feed on the green plants. And this energy will be stored in form of carbohydrates by the primary consumers. The secondary consumers obtains energy from the primary consumers after feeding on them. And this energy will later be transferred into the body of the tertiary consumers, which will only receive 10% of the energy that comes from the producers, which are the major, which has more energy than any other trophic level, the green plants, which are the producers. And this is because 90% of the energy is lost through other processes such as digestion, excretion. and only 10% of the energy is received by the tertiary consumers. When you explain this, you are assured of the 4 marks. Okay, so thank you for listening to my video. I hope the explanation here will help you and they will make sense for you. Thank you so much.